Good afternoon. Today is July 23rd, 2019, and I'm in our house here on High Bluff, I call it, at Homer, Alaska. Been a while since I talked. I think it's been a while. Who knows? When you get to be 78, sometimes things do get by. Um, we are in deep summer here, I would say, and maybe even a little bit past it. The leaves have stopped growing on trees since probably about the middle of June. So, yeah, we're into what we'll call deep summer here. The fireweed are out. They're working their way. The blossoms are working their way towards the top of the plant. And after they get there, then maybe we'll have about 6 weeks before snow flies. That's an old tale that you hear around here. Fireweed, when they are in full bloom, they are really pretty. The hillsides are just coated with fireweed. And some fireweed plants get to be really quite tall. I'm talking at least 6 feet or so. And so we kind of like to watch them, look at them, because they really are pretty when they're thrown together in tight bunches, as they tend to get. So, we're doing okay. Marilyn has a few health issues and so on, but we're working on getting them fixed. That is probably utmost in our mind right now, are her health issues. My speech is getting a little slower, maybe. I'm not, of course, reading anything. I'm just speaking off the top of my head like I've done for years. And so you can kind of, if you compared some of the earlier day videos taken with this one, you would see, yeah, there is a little slowness there. But aside from that, we're doing okay. I could have been out there cutting weeds. We're going to have a big rotary thing come in. Picture a barrel with spikes poking out of it. Only we're going to say 4 inch.
They call them hedgehogs?
Marilyn says they call them hedgehogs. I'm not sure that's the definition myself, but anyway, they're a rotating barrel with iron, I say spikes. They're points about 4 inches or 6 inches high, just poking out. And this thing whirls around, and it'll chomp up just about anything that you can think of. And that includes fireweed, pushki, and other assorted small limbs. And so we're going to have Southern Exposure come in and use one of these machines on some of our property. Should have gotten to it a little bit sooner, but we didn't. And so now we're in a process of waiting till they get here, and it might be another month at least, I'm sure. Still drink coffee. Really, I don't know. I guess if we had to do without coffee, we could, but we have a bunch stored so that if things do go to the bad, well, we're going to have coffee for a while at least. We're still trying to save up on canned goods and so forth for if that day comes about. And although if all the commotion happens down in the lower 48, I'd like to think that Alaska will keep going. Our electric power is different from the lower 48. There's Texas and then 2 or 3 other sections of the country that are sort of together. Um, Texas has its own, and I'm always impressed. Sometimes people make fun of Texans, but and especially here during pipeline days, Texans were not too well liked because they were the only ones that could do the proper welding on these pipes. They were about what 3 feet or so, maybe even more than 3 feet in diameter, and so it takes a lot of skill in welding these pieces together. And so anyway, some Alaskans grew resentful of this, and this was back in the late 70s, middle 70s, when the pipeline was being built. And so anyway, Texans weren't too well liked and appreciated in Alaska because, again, it's the old story, you know, a uncle or dad moves here with the company and he does his job well. They have a son or nephew who could use some work. Who do you think they're going to get? Well, they're going to get their son or nephew up here to work on the pipeline, and that's what happened a lot. A lot of, let's call it nepotism for want of a better word. So, Sean and family have got their move done. They moved from one house to another smaller house in Boise, and the boys, young men, as Sean is wont to call them, and I guess I go along with that, have moved into an apartment with some roommates, and so there's big changes there for everybody. And so what Marilyn and I will do someday in our old age, again, I'm 78, Marilyn is 74, where we're going to finish up, she just sneezed, is hard to say. We just, we may stay here in Alaska this coming winter, but again, that's to be determined by our health issues, and so we'll just have to wait and see on that. We called up Alaska Airlines to see what our mileage was like. Well, Marilyn has 95,000 miles, and I have around 80,000 miles. So we got some miles. And of course, the only thing is, people with mileage are sort of at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to making a reservation. Alaska or any other airline, they'd rather see somebody throwing out money to make a reservation. So if you got a lot of airline miles, yep, fine, but you're going to have to fly when the airlines can't get the seat filled by anybody else. Our church, we put in a call to a gentleman down in the lower 48, and he's 65, and he seems to be pretty athletically inclined. So we're hoping it's just him and his wife, I think. So we'll see how if he decides to accept a call. He's been asking some interesting questions, so he's wanting to know about swimming pools and so on. I take it he's a part-time swim coach. So I think he's been in charge of a 300-person, I believe, parish, and so I think he's looking for a little bit of rest and relaxation. But we'll see how that works out, if he accepts the call. The next thing that comes to mind is right now we have a crisis of sorts with Iran. we've been putting the squeeze on them economically. In other words, or we've asked other countries not to trade with them for various things, and so that's kind of put the squeeze on them. And when it comes to getting oil from them or whatever, and so they're kind of Iran is kind of hurting, and they've shot down a drone of ours. I think we shot down a drone of theirs, and Britain has had some real problems with them stealing. Well, I'll just say stealing oil tankers, and so we're not sure what's going to happen there. But President Trump has said that we're going to let Britain and other countries. That's their problems to handle, not ours. And I think a lot of people in the U.S. kind of approve of that. We just can't be the world's guardian, policeman, or whatever you want to call us. And Trump, to his credit, has gotten some of the NORAD, some of the European countries to pay their way. The Atlantic Treaty Organization, and whereas before they've been kind of sliding, and their countries, you might say, they look pretty good, and I'm talking about infrastructure and so on, whereas our infrastructure has been suffering, and we need to get caught up, and if we ever will, or how often, or how many years it's going to take, well, we don't know, but roads have holes, cracks, so on. We're just going to have to wait and see what transpires in that regard. But at least some of them are starting to throw in some money to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it's about ding-dong time. They're supposed to throw in 2% of their GDP, I believe. That's the last I heard. And, I don't think any of them have quite got up to that yet, but we'll see. And so we've got Iran, and then over on the other side we have China and her man-made islands, and just read yesterday, I believe it was, where Russia and China have flown into South Korea's ADIZ, their defense zone that most ocean countries have around them. The United States has an ADIZ or whatever around its borders, and if you cross over that particular extension of our border, we get a little upset about it, and we send up fighters and so on to see why you're doing that. And it's mostly noted off the coast of Alaska. That the Soviet, I take that back, the Russians, we don't really have, it's not really the United Soviet Socialist Republic anymore. A long time ago, back in the early 90s, it ceased becoming that and became Russia. And the Russians don't like us having NATO all around their border. And so they every once in a while throw a little tension into the game, especially if we're having troubles somewhere else. And you can about count on them to throw a few airplanes into our zone that they're not supposed to go into. And that always causes a little problem. On a political front, the Democrats, I'll say hatred, if that's the right word, of Trump has not decreased. It's still about the same, and using the same old things. The people that are white, and if you comment something about I'll just say an African American or a Oriental or whatever, then you're a white racist. And I guess has gotten to be so old. We're really tired of hearing that we're white supremacist or white racist or whatever, and and then let's not forget the Muslims. Some people are nice people and they're tolerant and whatever. I'm talking about white people, Christian religion, are somewhat tolerant of them, but they don't live. They're the ones that do not live next to them, like in a place like Detroit. Um, as you know, Detroit, Dearborn, has been taken over by the Muslims. And I think some people think that the Muslim religion is just another denomination down the street a ways. No, no. Uh, don't worship the same God. And there's been some debate there, I'm sure. Um, and then, well, we tolerate the Mormons. Well, yes, we do. But they at least uh, don't try to take over a place, at least in most of the United States. There are some places in, Utah that are pretty much Mormon, and they kind of run a show. But at least we kind of call him some sort of a woe-begotten Christian of some sort. They go by the nation's laws. The Muslims in heavily concentrated places of where there are a lot of Muslims, they live by the Sharia law, and no, we don't need that. And so, as far as they're concerned, eventually we're going to be one huge caliphate. I believe that's what they call it, organization, and it uses Sharia law. And there's the old story that there are places in Paris, or and I think maybe even London now, that cops don't really go into. They just stay away out of those areas where there's lots of Muslims because, well, they use Sharia law, or they make it tough on cops coming through. We're having troubles with people respecting cops, and cops are at times they'll shoot somebody, and it seems almost unreasonable that they did, and so that's a climate that has just been festering for years, and concerns mostly blacks. Um, just yesterday, there's an incident somewhere where the cops came to arrest somebody, and the people around them hosed, threw water at them. I mean, buckets of water. And so I'm not sure what that situation is going, how it's going to end, but it's not good at all. The law officer, the law does not have the respect that it once did, and we knew that if an officer got after us, there was good reason for it. He wasn't doing it just out of, being ornery or whatever. So there's been a lot of turmoil there, as usual. The blacks in Detroit in '67 rioted. They did so much rioting that I was there going to a computer school at the time, and some of their areas were just looked like they were bombed out, just like envision a World War II picture of what Germany in some places looked like. Well, this is what looked like in Detroit in some areas. Not pretty at all. You'd be walking along a street and somebody'd slide up out of the shadows and say, "Got a great wristwatch here. Would you like to buy it? $5?" And so, no thanks. And you walk on. I remember that one time, and I was really surprised to see that or hear that. Anyway, a guy coming up out of the shadows saying, Yeah, here's a nice gold wristwatch, and it was. It was nice. And he probably got it out of some store that they had robbed um, during the riots. And I, I've never forgotten that. Let's see. Not sure what else should be talking about. The LGBTQ people seem to be making more and more inroads as far as being accepted. They have parades during the 4th of July parade, even here in Homer, Alaska. There was a parade, there was a group of them, and all dressed up in oddball looking colors and so on in the parade. Um, and so that's another thing that's cropped up. And of course, I don't approve of them. But yet, do they have a right to exist? Yeah, they have a right to exist. But that doesn't make what they do right. Man and men and one man and one man get married. One woman get married. Theoretically, back in the old days, it was one man, one woman getting married. Well, in their world, it's not that way anymore. And usually, I think one partner sort of takes a role of a man, and the other partner takes a role of a feminine side. But some people would say, no, it's not that way at all. But from what I've seen, when I see a couple of lesbians and they are married, yeah, one has manly looks and actions, and the other one has woman looks and actions. That's what I see. Some people may dispute that, but I'm sorry. That's what I see. So Marilyn and I, in the evenings, have taken to watching Netflix and Amazon TV, and on Netflix we've taken to watching a lot of Korean serials, movies, and some of their serials will last. I mean, their movie time will last about an hour and 5 minutes or so, rather than the shorter 43-minute variety. And I think the 43-minute variety is when you do advertisements and stuff, and so it consumes an hour with the advertisements. But they have some that are a good hour and 5 minutes or so, just short of a movie length. And then we watched one Turkish serial, and my gosh, it went on and on and on. I mean, we'd go do 2 or 3 of them a day, and so it's kind of like a soapbox opera. And I don't know if that term means too much to you, but back in the day, and it really comes from radio plays. Why, well, the little woman could be ironing, and she could listen to the radio and this radio play, and it would be, who knows. I remember one called Just Plain Bill when I was a kid, and I don't remember anything about it other than the title and the name, Just Plain Bill. And it was a radio serial. And so, anyway, they were called soapbox operas, and so that has gone into these TV serials. And Marilyn and I have been watching a lot of Korean types and serials, and some of them are really good. Yeah, you get the English translation along the bottom, but that's no big deal. And if you're harder of hearing, which by the way I am, why, that's no big deal, because I can just read the writing. It's on the bottom of the screen, and know what's going on. So I don't remember how long this Turkish soapbox went, but it was about back in I don't know, 1400s or so. Uh, anyway, you had the Turkish tribes and so on, and then along the way you also had the Mongols who were trying to move into Europe, uh, and you can imagine there's a lot of squabbles there. The Turks were uh, Muslims, and the Mongols were, we'll just say, devil worshippers for want of a better word. They had their own spirits and stuff that they went with. Um, and you learn a little bit watching these things. Um, there was one Korean serial called Mr. Sunshine, and enjoyed that a lot. It takes up in the early, I'm going to say late 19th, early 20th century, and how Korea progressed. Korea has had a hard time in the 20th century when the Japanese took them over, and then come the end of the World War II, and we got the Japanese moved back to their island. Why, then the Koreans sort of under the South Koreans under our guidance started to come about, and in 1953, um, why the I'm sorry, June of 1950. I'm sorry, the North Koreans invaded South Korea and almost pushed the forces, which there were American army, almost back into the ocean. But the Americans settled down into a little enclave on the southeastern coast, I believe, of Korea, and held that until more forces came in, more air power came in, and gradually they they held their own. And then MacArthur had a big landing at Incheon, Incheon, yeah, Incheon, I'm saying it right, which took everybody by surprise. And then we drove the North Koreans back clear up to the Yalu River, practically, whereupon the Chinese said, "Oh no, you don't." And so then the Chinese came in and drove us back down to about the middle part of Korea, the 38th parallel area, and so we just kind of had a standoff there, and we stayed there for until 1953, when there was sort of a armistice. We just agreed to stop fighting, and that's the way it's been in all these years since 1953. And Russia also got involved in as far as air power is concerned. Our Air Force battled the Russians under the guise that they were Korean Air Force, but we've learned that that wasn't the case. So anyway, a little history there, and the world still hangs on. We're still accumulating canned goods, and with the expectation of someday, well, we've had so many weather problems down in the lower 48. A lot of corn didn't get planted, for example, and then of course there's soybeans, and I guess a lot of wheat has probably been a problem too. So we're expecting garden stuff to go up, all food to go up is what we're expecting. So we're trying to get a little ways ahead so that we have maybe food when they run it. Well, when food gets hard to get, and I think that's probably going to come. But then again, I've been predicting the end of the world as we know it for quite some years, and which some of my offspring are not too happy about, but they because they go along with it. So, all right, I don't know how long I've talked, but I've talked long enough, I think. I'm sure I've left out something, but we're still here, and furthermore, we hope to stay here. So, with that, we'll close down. God bless.